This year, we got a title unification match in the main event of WrestleMania. And that is pretty fitting, as there are many people who feel that a WWE title match should be the main event of every single WrestleMania. Although, they don't always get their way. How many times have they been denied this? Well, that's the topic of this episode, because today... Thank you to Edgar Perez and the rest of my awesome Patreon supporters. Thank all of you so much. Okay, so we're gonna begin things with the most recent and then work our way backwards. We start this list off with WrestleMania 35, which saw Seth Rollins take on Brock Lesnar for the Universal Championship in the opening bout of the main show. This was followed up 5 matches later by Daniel Bryan defending his championship against Kofi Kingston, who would end up taking the title home. But as tremendous of a moment as that was, it still wasn't the main event. That would go to Becky Lynch, Charlotte Flair, and Ronda Rousey as they put on the first women's match in WWE history to main event WrestleMania. And with Becky's phenomenal merchandise sales and how over she was with the crowd, plus how much WWE was invested into Ronda Rousey, it made sense that WrestleMania 35 would be the chosen moment to host this historic event. And yes, this was still a world title match, but it was for the women's division, which is an important distinction because we're only going to be looking at the men's title for today. And now, onto a mostly overlooked WWE title match at WrestleMania. Despite being a part of a major storyline, Randy Orton winning his second Royal Rumble really wasn't that big of a deal, as his match against Bray Wyatt at WrestleMania is something that no one really talks about outside of that weird projector screen thing. Now, this bout would be the 10th match of the night. It was immediately followed by Brock Lesnar and Bill Goldberg, which was for the Universal title. However, 2 matches later, and Roman Reigns would take on the Phenom in the main event. And of course, this was just another example of WWE trying to make a big deal out of the big dog. Not to mention that this was also framed as it could have been Taker's last match, therefore setting up a bout where Roman Reigns would be Nope, this match never happened. Just like WrestleMania 30, the streak is still intact. When it comes to this subject, The Rock vs. Hulk Hogan most famously did not main event WrestleMania 18, as that went to Triple H and Chris Jericho, despite many fans feeling like the Rock match should have went on after the Jericho match. But then, 10 years later, WWE seemingly agreed. Much to CM Punk's dismay, his match with Chris Jericho for the WWE Championship was not the main event of WrestleMania 28. It was the 8th match, which happened right before The Rock took on John Cena for their once-in-a-lifetime match, which of course was repeated the following year. However, on the bright side, at least it wasn't the Sheamus Daniel Bryan match, which only lasted 18 seconds, even though it was for the big gold belt. And with that, you kinda have to wonder, does WrestleMania 28 have anything to do with CM Punk and Daniel Bryan being in AEW now? Now, WrestleMania 28 wouldn't be the first time since WrestleMania 18 that Chris Jericho wouldn't be in the main event despite going up for a world championship. At WrestleMania 26, Chris Jericho would be denied a main event yet again. This time he was taking on Edge, but for the world title. And while that match came on 8th, John Cena and Batista would be the 10th match of the night, and that would be for the WWE Championship. Although, both of these matches, of course, would take a back seat to Taker taking on Shawn Michaels. This match was set up as the career versus the streak, and the choice to put it on last came from how well received it was the previous year. But while the self-proclaimed Mr. WrestleMania did get the main event over the title in this year, that doesn't mean that he doesn't know what it's like on the other end. Now, staying with Shawn Michaels, let's remember that he also got a world title match at WrestleMania 11, this time where there was only one world championship. And he would get this match against Big Sexy Kevin Nash, although the big man would end up retaining the title. Now, this particular WrestleMania was a pretty light card as there was only 7 matches, with Nash and Shawn Michaels coming on 6th. And then, after that, in the main event, we would see Bam Bam Bigelow taking on Lawrence Taylor. That's right, a celebrity got to main event WrestleMania. This decision decision came down to Diesel being the lowest grossing WWF World Champion of all time and Shawn Michaels not being a proven main eventer. And so, with Lawrence Taylor's NFL background, the idea here was that a star of his magnitude would easily be the biggest and most anticipated match of the entire card. And so, he was given the main event simply because of his celebrity. But he wouldn't be the first celebrity to do so, but don't worry, we'll be getting to that later on. Alright, as you might have noticed, in these early WrestleManias, this kind of thing really didn't happen too often, as we don't have very many incidents left to go. And now we're getting down to the wire, as this is the second time ever that the WWE Championship match was not the main event of WrestleMania. This took place at WrestleMania 8, where Macho Man Randy Savage took on Ric Flair and beat him for the WWF Championship. This was the 6th match of the show, with the main event going to Hulk Hogan vs. Sid Justice as the 10th match. Now, for those of you who remember, this was billed as a double main event. However, if you're anything like me, you don't acknowledge this because obviously the main event is the last match on the show. Now, allegedly, the original plan was to have Hulk Hogan vs. Ric Flair in the main event, but after house shows with that very match didn't sell too well, they decided to switch things up. And as far as management is concerned, they viewed it that clearly Hogan couldn't possibly be the problem, therefore it had to be Flair. And so they decided to stick in with the Macho Man in the middle of the card, leaving their franchise Hulk Hogan to take on Sid. And surprisingly, this would be Sid's first of 2 WrestleMania main events. And if you were going to try to say there's such a thing as a double main event, shouldn't both matches go on last? Seems really weird, doesn't it? Okay, so by now you might have noticed that we've been talking about any non-title main events for WrestleMania. But there are several times where the WWE Championship itself has played second fiddle to another World Championship. So before we get into our final entry, let's do a lightning round of all of those. At WrestleMania 20, Eddie Guerrero and Kurt Angle fought for the WWE Championship, but the main event went to Chris Benoit, Triple H, and Shawn Michaels, who competed for the World Championship. The following year at WrestleMania 21, John Cena and JBL competed for the WWE title, only to be followed by Batista and Triple H, again for the World Championship. 3 years later, and the WWE Championship would be up for grabs in a triple threat match between Triple H, John Cena, and Randy Orton. Now, that match would go on 8th, but the 10th match and the main event would go to Taker and Edge. Then, this phenomenon wouldn't happen again until 10 years later, when the phenomenal AJ Styles would take on Shinsuke Nakamura, who he would successfully defend his WWE Championship against. And for this Mania, the main event, just like recently, would be between Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns, with the Universal title on the line. And then the most recent time as of this recording happened at WrestleMania 37, where Bobby Lashley and Drew McIntyre would compete for the first time in a year in front of a live crowd, and they would do this for the WWE Championship. Later on that same day, Bianca Belair and Sasha Banks would main event night 1 of WrestleMania. This of course was followed by Roman Reigns defending his Universal Championship in a triple threat against Edge and Daniel Bryan in the main event of night 2. And with that being said, let's go to the very first time that a WWF World Championship was not in the main event of WrestleMania. People sometimes forget that the main event of the very first WrestleMania featured Mr. T and Hulk Hogan teaming up to go against Paul Orndorff and Roddy Piper. And while Hogan was the WWF World Champion at the time, the belt wasn't actually up for grabs, meaning that the first time a WWF World Title match would be the main event of WrestleMania wouldn't be until the following year when Hogan defended it against King Kong Bundy. And you see, I told you that Lawrence Taylor wouldn't be the first celebrity to get to main event of WrestleMania, as that's an honor that goes to Mr. T. Alright, so there you go, all the times where the WWE Championship did not main event WrestleMania. But out of all these times, which match do you think should have gotten the top spot? Let me know down in the comments, and please be subscribed to this channel and give this video a big like. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, Dave knows.